Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. If you read the title or the thumbnail, you already know that we're going to be doing my March reading wrap up. These are some of my favorite videos to film because it just gives me a time to like reflect on my month, remember what I read and what I thought of them. I just love making videos like this and I hope you guys enjoy watching them. But first, let's jump into my stats before I actually get to the books. I read 8 books and from those books were 3,626 pages. I don't actually know how accurate that is because I just pulled the numbers from Goodreads instead of like flipping to the end of each book to see, but it's around there somewhere. 2 books that I read were 5-star reads and there were several others that were very close. I had 1 book that was a reread, 3 audiobook listens, and the genre breakdown is 1 thriller, 3 romance-ish, 2 fantasy, 1 classic, and 1 dark romance. I'll stop rambling on and let's jump into the books I read. So the first book I read in March was Keeping 13 by Chloe Walsh, and I loved this one just as much, if not more. If you guys have never heard of this series, you may have been living under a rock because I kept seeing this everywhere and I was finally convinced to read it just because I saw so many people saying how good it was. This is a rugby romance, but it's not your typical sports romance. This is following our main characters, Johnny and Shannon. Shannon is like the new girl at school. She has had a really difficult upbringing and home life, and she's struggled with bullying at her old school. And then Johnny is like the star rugby player. He's a couple years older than Shannon, and book 2 kind of follows them being friends and navigating like the difficulties going on in their lives. And even though this is a YA series, it deals with some heavier topics, which I really appreciate and honestly makes me love the characters and feel so much more connected to the characters. It is definitely really sad and heavy at times, but there's also really fun, lighthearted, funny moments. This has the found family trope in it, which, if you guys know, is one of my favorite tropes ever, and I can't help but just absolutely fall in love with every single character. This one, I'm not going to go into what it's about because it would definitely give away spoilers for book 1, but this one is definitely a lot heavier, darker, serious. It tackles a lot of the issues that are brought up in the first book, just more in depth in this one, and the romance in this one was just perfect. I love these characters so much and I love being in this world, and it broke my heart and put it back together all at the same time. I think in my February reading wrap up, I rambled on about book 1 for so long, so I'm not going to do that with this one. But if you want to know more of my thoughts on just like the series in general, do talk about the first book a lot more in depth in my February reading wrap up if you do want to go check that out. But yes, this one was just perfect and amazing, and I can't wait to jump into the next book in the series. If you hadn't already guessed, I gave this book a 5 stars. I ate up every single second of it, and if you've seen this book and you've been thinking about reading this series, this is your sign to go pick them up and read it now. Your life will be changed. I also did a reread of a childhood classic. That was a prompt I had drawn in my March TBR video, and of course I picked to reread the first Harry Potter book, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. I usually get a lot of questions about these dust jacket covers I have on them, and these are the Nerdy Ink covers. I'll link it down below if you guys would be interested in checking them out. They also have like alternate dust jacket covers for a lot of other popular series. I used to reread this series all the time, but it's been a while since I reread them, and I sat down and finished this book in one sitting. And even though the first book is so lighthearted and truly is a children's book, I was getting so emotional reading it. I don't know, something about it just took me back to my 7-8-year-old self reading the series for the first time and just feeling so immersed in the magic and truly feeling connected to the characters. And I don't know, it was so nostalgic and bittersweet to read it again, but it also like reignited my love for this series, even though it never went away. Like, I am still just as obsessed with it, but I don't know, I guess it just reminded me why it means so much to me in the first place. And honestly, it was just a really rewarding read because not only did it remind me how much I love Harry Potter, it reminded me like why I fell in love with reading in the first place. I'm not going to talk too much about these books because they are so popular and the franchise in general is so popular that a lot of people already know what they're about and what happens in them. But if you're a Harry Potter fan and it's been a while since you've done a reread, I highly recommend it because honestly, the little girl inside me like needed that. While I was reading it, I looked up on YouTube like Hogwarts ambiance, and it would play like the Harry Potter music with like the sound of rain, and the background would be like the Great Hall or the Gryffindor common room, and it just helped immerse me into the book so much more. And I literally started bawling as soon as I closed the book, which, like I said, is strange because this one is like very lighthearted, nothing too serious or emotional going on in here, but that's just how much the series means to me, and I would love to continue reading the series throughout the year, so I might try and squeeze in other books in the series as the year goes on, because honestly it just means so much to me to reread these, and I'm really glad I did. This was obviously a 5-star read for me. It always has been and always will be. And yeah, I just love it. I'm gonna stop rambling because, like I said, people know Harry Potter, but it really just meant so much to me to read this again, and I'm so glad that I did. Then I read a classic. One of my goals for the year is to read 5 classics, and I think this is my second classic of the year. This is a really short one, and this is a book I feel like a lot of people had to read for high school, and I surprisingly never had to, and I was very curious to see what I would think about it because I hear a lot of people say this is one of their favorite classics, and that is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This is actually a fairly short one, and I kind of went into it blind, not really knowing what it was about, and I annotated the heck out of this book. I'm gonna flip through so you can see my highlights. Yeah, there they are. And I did pink, yellow, and blue, and I did like a key at the front so I would remember what they meant. Orange or pink color was quotes, the blue was social commentary, and the yellow was like sad, heartbreaking. And then there's also some parts where I like, if you can see, I underlined some quotes. The writing in this was absolutely fantastic, and I'm so impressed how S.E. Hinton was able to fit so much meaning into such a short story. You guys don't know what this book is about. It basically follows either a week or 2 weeks in the life of our main character, Ponyboy, who is kind of in this group of people known as like the Greasers, and in this town society they live in, there's like the Greasers who are kind of like lower class people, and then there's like a name for the higher class people, and I can't remember what it was, but it's basically a lot of social commentary on like the conflict and differences between those groups of people, but also all the ways in which they are the same and everyone is just human. And honestly, I just thought it was so beautifully written. It was heartbreaking also, and if you're interested in getting into classics and you don't know where to start, I think this one would be a very easy place to start. It was very digestible, easy to understand, very easy plot to follow, but it had such impactful and important messages. It definitely isn't my favorite book in the world by any means, but I'm very glad I read this. I believe I gave this a 3.5, maybe a 3.75 out of 5 stars. Mainly those points are coming from how well it was written and how impactful the message of it was. But as you can see, I'm not remembering like a lot of details about it, so I haven't really thought a bunch about this one after reading it, but I did really enjoy annotating it, kind of getting all of the messages out of the story. I do understand why this one is a classic, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend. Next, I read another fairly short book, which is actually a novella, and that is Six Scorched Roses by Carissa Broadbent. This is, I think, considered 1.5 or something like that in the Crowns of Nyaxia series. I recently read Serpent and the Wings of Night. I read that you're supposed to read this one before going into Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, so I did that. However, this almost has like nothing to do with the central plot of the other 2 books, so I was a little bit confused why it's recommended to be read before going to the second book. But my mom actually recently finished the second book, and she said the characters from this show up in the next book, so I'm assuming that's why. This one was really short. I flew through it. It was super entertaining. The book follows 2 central characters, Lilith and Vale. It's taking place on a completely different continent than the story in the first book. Lilith is a human, and where she lives, they're kind of fighting like a plague. There's a lot of sickness going around. They can't grow crops, and she is trying to find a cure for this. So she is desperate for help and ends up going to like the only vampire in their town. In case you didn't know, Crowns of Nyaxia is like a vampire fantasy world. I just realized I never said the genre. But yeah, it's fantasy, romance, vampires, but the vampires are very reminiscent of Fae. It's not like your traditional vampire, if that makes sense. But basically Lilith is desperate for help, and she goes to the only vampire in town. His name is Vale. He's very mysterious and broody and dark, but he agrees to help her in exchange for these roses, and he doesn't even know what the meaning or value is behind the roses, but she convinces him that they are of great value. So she starts meeting him once a month for this exchange where he will help her for a rose, and things kind of start to go from there. A little romance develops. Like I said, it is very short, so I didn't feel like super connected to the characters. I definitely enjoyed the romance, but I didn't feel like their chemistry was like anything amazing. But it was a fun, quick read, and I know these characters are going to come into play in a bigger way in the next book in the series, which I'll hopefully be getting to very, very soon. Very enjoyable read. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. I honestly can't remember. It's kind of hard for me to rate a novella a 4-star or higher just because you don't really get a lot from it. But as far as novellas go, this was a very enjoyable one. This month, I also read Daisy Hates the Great Undoing and Magnolia Park's Into the Dark. If you guys have been following me, watching my videos for a while, you will know that when I first started the Magnolia Parks universe, I did not enjoy the first book. I started to like it more when I read the first Daisy book, and from there I have like slowly absolutely fallen in love with this series, this world they live in, and these characters, and both of these two books absolutely ripped my heart out. I have been listening to this series on audiobook because it takes place in the UK, and something about like hearing their British accents makes me feel way more immersed into the story and more connected to the characters. There are different voice actors depending on the characters, which once again just adds to the ambiance of everything, and it also helps me like understand the slang and jargon a little bit more. So if you're interested in reading this, I would recommend checking out the audiobooks. First one was Daisy Hates the Great Undoing, which is the fourth book in the entire universe, but it's the second Daisy Hates book. I'm not gonna lie, I think I get this one mixed up with the first Daisy Hates book just because there's like some similar things happening, so there's definitely some overlap in my brain about the plots of the two, but I do know that I enjoyed this one more and it was a lot more heartbreaking. I don't even know what to say about this book without giving it away, other than that it's high society London. It gives Gossip Girl vibes, but way more dramatic and way more toxic, and this book specifically is following Daisy, who's our main character, her love interest Christian, and her older brother Julian. Julian is like the biggest crime lord in London, so there's like kind of that aspect of it. And the Daisy books, in comparison to the Magnolia books, definitely have more action going on just because there is kind of like that gang society aspect, but super entertaining, super toxic, yet I love these characters so much. They all make mistakes, but that honestly makes me love them more. I think I say this every time I talk about this universe. They're often advertised as romances, but to me, they're more just like contemporary fiction. Don't go into this thinking it's gonna be a romance. I think that was my mistake and part of the reason I disliked the first book so much, but as I started to read them and understand truly like what they're about and what the genre is, it made me love the characters and the world so much more. This one absolutely broke my heart. And then I went into the most recent book in this universe, which is Magnolia Parks Into the Dark. So my light keeps dying. That's problematic. We're gonna continue. Do I continue without the light, or do I wait for it to charge? I don't want to lose my train of thought, but also this lighting is not doing it for me. Hang on a second. Thankfully found a solution for the light. So back to what I was saying. This book, I have no words. The progress I've experienced from hating Magnolia and BJ in the first book to literally would sell my soul to help them. Not literally, but like they're fictional characters and I feel like they're real. Like sometimes I think about like what are Magnolia and BJ doing right now? And then I remember that they only exist in the pages of a book and I'm sad. This book was incredible, and honestly this is probably the most mundane compared to the rest of the series, just in the fact that you're kind of just going with them throughout their lives and watching them trying to learn how to communicate, how to navigate this world where they're so in the press, but also dealing with trauma they've gone through and experiences that have happened to them. I don't know, it just feels so... Like I said, I have no words. Like I literally can't even describe the way I feel about this book, and I also can't describe the plot because it would give everything away. All I can say is highly recommend. Oh, I didn't even say what I rated this one. I think I rated this 4.5 and I rated this 4.75. Very close to a 5-star, but I don't know that I've given any of these books a 5-star. I might have given Magnolia Parks The Long Way Home a 5-star. Honestly, I can't remember, but they're just shy of a 5-star to me. I don't know why it is that I can't give them a 5-star because they are some of the best books I've ever read, but I don't know. They're not 5 stars, but 4.75. All I can say is give this series a chance. If you're like me and you read the first one and you weren't really feeling it, I urge you to keep pushing because these books are just amazing, and especially these later books just deal with such important topics. This one in particular tackles a lot to do with grief, and the way that Jessa Hastings writes these characters and how they're experiencing grief and trauma and everything else in their lives is so beautiful. Oh my gosh, I just love it so much. Magnolia and BJ in this book were Perfect. And I'm gonna stop rambling because like I said, I literally don't have words and I'm pretty sure I'm not making any sense, but all I can say is go read this series. Then I read my only thriller this month, which was No Exit. And if you recently watched my April TBR list, you might be confused because this is on my April TBR list. And if you watched my March TBR list, you may have noticed by now that I did not really stick to my TBR list. I mean, there's a couple on here that were on my March TBR list, but for the most part, I let myself mood read. And one of the things I realized towards the end of the month was that I hadn't read any thrillers, and this one was on my April TBR list, and I learned that there is a Hulu adaptation of this that's a movie, I believe. And so I just wanted to read a quick little thriller, and I went ahead and read it in the month of March instead of waiting for April. I haven't really read a thriller in a long time, so I'm glad I did pick this one up, and I haven't watched the adaptation yet, but I plan on doing it soon to see if it kind of lives up to the book. I believe I rated this 4 stars. It definitely wasn't the best thriller I've ever read, and there were some things, I guess. I would say the main plot twist I guessed, but then I wasn't expecting how far they would take it and all the other plot twists that came after that. I will also say, compared to other thrillers I've read, this one is pretty, like, gruesome, and there are, like, the way some things are described kind of made me feel icky, but other than that, I don't really have any major bones to pick with it. This book is about a girl traveling to see her mother who is sick, and she gets caught in a snowstorm in the middle of the night and has to pull over at a rest stop. It's kind of like in the middle of nowhere, and when she gets there, there's, I think, like 4 other people there, and they're all strangers. They don't know each other, and they realize they're gonna be snowed in there for the night. She ends up going out to her car and notices the car parked next to her has a little girl inside of it, and so she now realizes that one of the people in the rest stop with her has taken this child, and she's stuck there with them for the rest of the night. I'm not gonna explain anything else, but I highly recommend this thriller. It was really quick, really fast paced, super fun read, definitely a little bit scary at times, and like I said, it had a tendency to be a little bit more gruesome than some other thrillers I've read, but I definitely felt my heart pounding. Like, I haven't read a thriller in a while that actually had me on the edge of my seat, like nervous for what was gonna happen next. So if you like thrillers and you're looking for a good one, I highly recommend No Exit. This was also the first thriller I read by Taylor Adams, but I've heard that Taylor Adams has written a lot of other really good thrillers, so after reading this, I do plan to dive into more books that they have written. And then the last book I read this month is a book that, 1, I wasn't sure I would ever read, and 2, was definitely really intimidated to read, but honestly, I've just heard so many mixed reviews about it that I had to find out for myself what it was all about, and that is Haunting Adeline. If you've seen this book on the internet anywhere, you know that a lot of people say it's disturbing, it's icky, so messed up, like all this stuff, and that's what I'd heard about it, but I also hear people saying they absolutely love it. This is a dark romance, but honestly, after reading this book, I would call it more of a thriller with dark romance aspects. The dark romance aspects are definitely very prevalent, but I would say the first half of this book has no romance whatsoever, and even when it does get to the romance part, it's not very romancy. It's mainly a thriller in my mind. Now, I haven't read a whole ton of dark romance. It's definitely not like my specific taste when it comes to romance. But like I said, I did just want to know like what all the hype and non-hype was about. I'm gonna go ahead and tell you guys that I rated this book 3 stars. Definitely wasn't my favorite. I didn't find it as disturbing as I thought I would, but I also didn't like fall in love with it or fall in love with the characters by any means. It was very, very entertaining. Not the type of book I would probably ever choose to pick up again in the future, but I am glad I read it. And I'm currently partway through the second book in this duet. I'm not gonna say too much else about it because I do have another video coming out very, very soon where I talk a lot more in depth about what I think of this book and the one following this. So be on the lookout. I'm not gonna tell you guys what the video is because I want it to be a surprise, but I will go a lot more in depth about this book and this duology. So I'm gonna leave it at that for now. But yeah, I gave 3 stars. I think I gave it 3 stars. It might have been like a 2.75. I can't remember, but it was just like mid to me, if that makes sense. So those are all the 8 books I read in the month of March. I feel like I had a pretty good reading month. 8 is a very good number for me. That's pretty consistent with how my months have been going this year. And like you guys saw, I got 2 5-star reads and several like 4-star or higher reads, so I would consider it a really good reading month. Be sure to check out my April TBR video if you want to see the books that I'm planning on reading in April. Check out all my other previous reading wrap-ups for some more book recommendations. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and also just because it would help me out a lot. I'll also have my TikTok and Instagram linked in the description below if you guys would be interested in following me over there and seeing my other content. Leave a comment below if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them, and as always, thank you guys so much for watching. That's all. Bye guys!